coming this February.
Hey, Mike, is an ad on your phone? We're about to record. Can you?
An up-and-coming young journalist.
Yeah, let me see if I can try to
Okay,
turn
what
it
the
on.
hell, Mike?
Guitarist for the band Munin.
Are you sure it's not your phone?
Joins Mike at the helm for a 7-hour podcasting extravaganza.
No, my phone's definitely off.
It sounds like
He's
it's
handsome.
coming from, handsome?
He's got a jawline
Wait, is that from the sky?
and a voice like melted butter.
It sounds like it's coming from
We
the
need to
door.
check outside.
And his name
Okay.
is Joe Carson.
Who the hell are you?
Hello and welcome to the Mike at the Helm podcast. I'm your host, Mike Spencer.
And I'm your host, Arza Helm. Today, we have a very special guest, a young Joseph Carson, someone that just graduated in broadcast journalism. He is an expert in all things journalism, everything, quite literally, everything. He also has been a band member in a couple bands, so we'll hear about that today. And he is a very multicultural man. He has lived abroad, and yeah, so welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me to join you guys.
Joseph is our second guest, and I'm still not sure on whether or not our introducing is going okay. Like, part of me wants to have everybody stand up and tell us their name and their favorite color or their favorite food. That's what I remember in third grade, so I feel like it would still work in the podcast world.
Well,
Yeah, but
my
then they
name
can't see
is
who's standing up.
Joseph. Favorite color is mustard yellow.
Mustard yellow?
Yeah.
There's no way that's true.
It's true.
You're off the podcast if it
It's
is.
true.
Oh, okay.
Every time I
No.
see something that's mustard yellow, I'm like, I like that.
Wait, is that real?
Arza, I don't...
Yeah, it's true. If I
Mustard yellow.
maybe not mustard yellow, but I just love the color yellow. I'm wearing yellow right now. It's a yellow.
That sounds like such a meme color.
Is that-
like you would say it as a meme, mustard yellow. I feel like I can't think of a worse color to say right now. Arza, what's your favorite color? I actually don't know that.
Purple.
Purple? Really?
That's a
Look
good
at you
one.
guys. Mine's black.
together.
Black?
We're Waluigi.
Classic black.
Wario.
Well, black is debatable if that's... Isn't that debated if that's...
Oh, I hate that. I have to go through this conversation every time I tell people my favorite color, because they'll be like, "What's your favorite color?" And I'll be like, "Black." And they'll be like, "No, that's not a color." And I'll be like, "White." And they'll be like, "No, that's not a color." And I'll be like, "Gray." And they'll be like, "No, that's not a color." And I'll be like, "Red." And they'll be like, "You one of those people?" And it's that every time. I guess you can't have red as your... I love black, white, and gray, and I love red. It's just, yeah, it's never fun.
Wait, so Joseph, when
Their
you watch
colors.
The Office, do you dig that Dwight's style? Is that
Yeah, in a uncle sort of way.
in the uncle sort of way? It's a good description.
Dwight's all about the mustard yellow. Take after your uncle.
Well, Joseph, we can get right into it. I remember you telling a certain ultrasound story
Yes. Yes.
I want to hear again, because it's been not 6 years, 3-4 years, and I can't quite remember it.
Already
I just remember
putting
laughing
one
a lot.
Okay.
Might be a good warm-up thing for people to get to know you.
It's definitely a good way to get familiar. So here's what happened. I, in the year 2016, was preparing to go on an LDS mission to Taiwan. And so before I left, I had to get a physical exam to make sure that I was healthy enough to send overseas for 2 years and not have any major bad stuff happen or hiding under the surface that they didn't know about. And so in the process of my physical exam, there came the what's it called? The hernia exam.
Turning cough type thing?
The turn and cough. And so they were down there, and they said, oh no. Which is never a great thing to hear when a doctor is holding your testicles. Oh no. And I said,
No.
oh no, oh no, what? And they said, it's, it could be nothing, but it also could be testicular cancer.
Wait, did they say it like that?
Yeah, they did.
I like how it's like the best case and the worst case, like right there.
It's nothing, or you have a deadly form of cancer in your balls. So that was kind of a scary couple of weeks between, that and then getting tested. And so what they did is they said, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll set you up with an ultrasound at the local hospital. You could you can go, they'll scan you, they'll make sure that everything's okay. And so they sent me to the hospital. I went a couple weeks later, and I was there with my dad, and we were in the waiting room, and filling out, the questionnaire, your personal information or whatever, and I handed it back to the desk and just sat there. I was like playing some zombie game on my phone or whatever. And there were a lot of other people in this room. It was like the radiology part of the hospital. And so there are lots of people there to get various scans and whatever. And suddenly, out of nowhere, not out of nowhere, out of the back room, there's like these two double doors that would swing open and shut. A nurse comes through, leans out with a clipboard, and is like, Joseph Carson with a testicular ultrasound. Full volume.
Just announces it to the world.
And everyone kind of like looks over at me, and I stand up and put my head down and walk shamefully over to the nurse. And my dad was like, do you want me to come with you? And I was like, no, please no. No offense, but this is already humiliating enough. I don't want to add anything to it. So I go
This is my alone time.
into this room where there's like a bed and a big machine. And I go in, and she's like, all right, strip. And so I'm like, okay, sure. And she leaves, and then I take off everything from the waist down, and then lay on a bed on my back, kind of like with my arms crossed over my chest, like a mummy.
Wait, is that the position they told you to be in?
No, I felt so vulnerable and exposed.
Oh,
I pulled
man.
everything in
More
tight.
protective of the vitals when you have your arms over your chest, Arza. You wouldn't understand. You've never gotten your testicles have an ultrasound.
Exactly.
So.
That's true.
It's like probably an evolutionary reaction, because your most vulnerable parts are just out there, and so you want to protect everything else you can, And the room was so cold. You guys, it was so cold in there. It was just that'll be important later.
Okay.
So I'm laying there on the bed, naked from the waist down, arms crossed over my chest, laying on this pillow. And then I hear the nurse come in, and there's like a curtain between the door and the rest of the room. And she's like, are you ready? And obviously no. Like, I'm not ready for anything to happen in that position except what was about to happen, I guess. So I said, sure. Come on in.
And you were, what, 18 at the time?
Yeah, I would have been 18.
Just a teenager.
Maybe.
So did you do the hernia check like when you're in middle school? I know like middle schoolers have to go through that sometimes.
Yeah, I've done it
Okay.
plenty of times growing up. For like Boy Scout camps or whatever, you always have to get a physical done.
Right. So this is the first time it's potentially cancerous.
Yeah. So the nurse just walks in, and of course she's, a consummate professional, so she doesn't like freak out or anything, which would have been, I don't know if that would have helped or made it worse if she was like, whoa, hey-oh, okay. But she didn't say anything. It just kind of walked in, and I was like trying my hardest to avoid eye contact and just staring straight at the ceiling with just complete fear in my heart. So I can't remember. She really didn't say anything like the whole time. Just total silence. I think she might have said like, "Have you ever done one of these before?" And I was like, "No, I have not." And
You're like, "Yeah, every weekend actually."
one of my hobbies.
My part-time job.
So I don't see anything happening in the room. I'm looking straight ahead, which for me is the ceiling. And so I can just kind of like see from my peripheries, movement and her kind of moving around and getting stuff ready and priming the machine or whatever. And so suddenly there was a sensation that I can only describe with 4 words. So much warm jelly. I just heard a and then suddenly there was warm just jelly all over everything. And it was weird. It felt like I had an accident almost. And it was just this goo. Like I like dipped my genitals in warm jello or something. It was I didn't like it. I didn't like the feeling.
I feel like it could feel like decent if you weren't like in a hospital. Like maybe I could try that. Arza?
Yeah, it sounds like a type of therapy.
Yeah,
honestly.
like a
Type
warm jello tub to lay in and relax.
Have you guys heard of the ball koozie? Have you guys seen that on the internet?
No.
So that's a jacuzzi just for your testicles. So they're like testicle shaped. We'll have to post a picture on our Instagram. I think it's like $40, and I thought about getting it for my friend as a joke for Christmas. But they're like testicle shaped, and you just stick your testicles in, and it heats them up if you want them to be heated up. I feel like usually people want the opposite, but I guess some people want to get into a hot tub just for their testicles.
Does it have like jets in it?
I think so. I think it's like the whole shebang,
whoa,
and it's like a $40. it's like the size of like a small book, and you just put them in there. Sorry, back to your story.
That could maybe be nice, but the warm jelly was. The one nice thing though was that it was warm because the room, like I said, was very cold. And so then the part of the ultrasound. Oh, also. How do I put this without, getting too blue?
Scaring off the kids.
So a man's genitalia, right, has 2 parts. There's the testicles and then the penis, right? And so
Yeah, I got both those.
So in order to ultrasound just the testicles, the penis had to be out of the way, and so. Wait, I forget. Before the blue jelly, she threw 2 towels at me. Like, didn't even like put them on the table. Just kind of like tossed them onto my body, and was like, "All right, prop them up, and then pull it back."
Wait, what?
Prop it up, pull it back.
So,
she's talking to you like you've been there before. Like you
like
do
I'm
go
supposed
over
to
there
know
every
what that
weekend.
means. And then, but she wanted me to fold one of them and then kind of like tuck it underneath my balls so they were elevated, like on a display case for jewelry in a fancy store. And then the penis had to be folded back with the towel and kind of like kept in place. So my hands were just kind of like on my waist holding this towel down for the entire time. It was an incredibly awkward position. And so once she got the jelly on there, she was like, spread your legs apart. And so I was like, whoop, whoop, and like moved them apart a little bit. And then she's like, further. And I was like, whoop, whoop. And then she's like, further. I'm like going until my legs are like out almost like as far as they could go to the side. So I'm laying there.
Almost doing this
Hands
split.
on my
Just testing
waist.
your flexibility.
Laying, staring at the ceiling with my legs completely off the sides of the bed. And then she brings out the instruments. We were just like, it was I couldn't see, again, because I was making no eye contact at all. But there were two parts to her tools. And one of them was like a metal plate. And the other part was like a metal rod. And they were both really heavy and, again, really cold. But she put one of them underneath my balls and then took the metal rod and like pushed down on top and then went like from side to side to side to side for like 20 minutes.
On your testicles?
Mm-hmm. They were just being ground in
What?
this
That's like
metal vise.
That's like a mammogram, but for your for your manograms.
A manogram.
Dang.
And so I was just trying to just get it over with. But I'm a pretty friendly person, and I'd like to make conversation. And this whole time had been so awkward and so quiet. And so about halfway through the 20 minutes of ball crushing, about minute 10, I kind of turned my head and looked at her and was like, "So, do you do this often?" And she didn't say anything.
She just didn't reply.
She just didn't reply.
That's how often she does it.
And then just kept going.
I think that's like the worst part of her day.
Yeah, maybe.
I feel like she has to do that a lot.
Order list and
It's just like,
So medically, do you know what the purpose was for them to put your testicles on like one of those guacamole grinders?
I think it was like the plate underneath is kind of like it reflects the ultrasound waves back to the wand, which I think was like some kind of receptor, so that you could get a clear vision of the whole thing. And so moving it back and forth was so that she could get like a full picture of the business.
Okay.
Once it was all over,
Some people are into that.
once it was over, she just threw a towel at me and was like, "Go clean yourself up," and then left. And then I did, and then like I
Just
never
spit on
saw
yourself
her
up,
again.
too.
I just had to like walk out of the room and then walk down the hallway and out of the hospital by myself.
I just want to imagine that this nurse like isn't normally like a testicle nurse. That's probably not the right words, but I imagine like, you know, 2 of her coworkers called out sick, and she's like never done any of this before, and then you're her first patient where she has to do the grinding. And that's why she was in such a bad mood. Because I feel like every doctor, I mean, there's definitely been doctors that have touched me all over my body, and they've always been pretty cool, I feel like, about it. Like, I don't know, I feel like it's going to be so much more awkward if you're in a bad mood or you're, like, silent. when
Yeah.
you're, like, molesting someone else.
Yeah, because no one wants to be exposed in that way to anyone that they don't trust closely. And so, like, being in that situation with the doctor is really, uncomfortable. And you're right, most of the time, they don't make it awkward. This just seems like, oh, yeah, just a checkup. Let's just come in here and turn your head and cough, But then this one was an outlier.
Right, because I feel like I can't imagine, like, people that get prostate exams. Like, the doctor is, like, just in such a bad mood, and he's silent, even, like, when he's, like, sticking it in. Like, he's like, bend over, don't talk to me for 40 minutes. And, like, I just feel like that's not a normal thing. I don't know. Arza, have you ever had, like, any weird doctor experiences?
well, not with a doctor, but at TSA one time, I was flying through the airport, and well, I wasn't flying through the airport. I was going through the airport so that I could fly. And
Right. So most people do.
I was going through the security gate, raise your arms, you get scanned, and then you move through or whatever and grab your bags. So I got scanned, and, there's the little screen that will show if any area was flagged. And if nothing was flagged, then it says, like, you're good to go or whatever. And so the screen had a little flag right on my privates, right on my boys. And the guy was like, "Oh, are you like a concealed carry? Like, did you forget about a weapon you have there?" And I was like, "I don't."
So
have
is it a
anything
big
there."
metal spot?
It was like, it's pretty. I don't know. It's just like on the
Like,
like
it
a little
covered the
square
genitals?
on the.
That's
area,
pretty
not
big. That's
area, my
crazy.
body.
That was like a weird malfunction.
Did you know what it was?
No, I have no idea. And so I went through, and he was like, is it cool if I just do a pat down right here? Like, I don't want to, like, strip search you or anything. Like, dude, do whatever you need to do. And I think I actually
Take
asked
off
him,
my
I was
pants, I don't
like,
care.
he got down there, and I was like, he's like, got down and got his kind of like face in that area, like close, and was really feeling around my butt and privates and
out.
thighs and stuff. And I think I asked him, I was like, do you do this often? I think I asked him that too. And he was like, He's like, no, not too often, but normally people are way pissier about it, so I'm glad you're having a good attitude. And I can't remember. He made a couple jokes, but it was fine. It didn't really bother me too much. I was a changed man, though, and I always search for that guy in airports, and I can never find him.
He knows you on a level that most people don't.
I feel like the more you and I do this podcast, Arza, I feel like we have like the most similar stories like out of anybody in the universe. Because every time, I don't know what it is, every time I go through the TSA, they always, I've never had like a transplant or anything. They always, like, it seems like one of my testicles is metal. Like it's a tiny little piece of metal, like less than an inch, and it's right on my private parts. And they always have to pat me down. It's always nothing. But that is so freaking funny that we have to go through that. Or you've at least gone through it once, but it's every time. There's never been a time where I haven't had to get the pat down.
Quite literally have
or like
balls
go into
of steel.
some private room. I guess so. I mean, it's just a steel nut. I don't know. Maybe my parents didn't tell me.
But yeah, that was a good introduction to what Joseph is all about.
So anyway, that's kind of my whole deal.
So I think that's it. I think we got it.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
It's just us talking about ball stories. I feel like that's not bad.
But yeah, what I really was wanting to talk to you about today, Joseph, assuming everyone is done talking about balls, is I've been really excited to talk to you about journalism and the state of journalism, and maybe what intrigues you about journalism. So maybe to start off this conversation, could ask what got you interested? What has your pathway been so far? And like, what are you looking to do in the future?
Sure. When I was in high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do in college. It seemed like most of my friends had a pretty clear idea, like they wanted to study law or political science or neuroscience or whatever. And I didn't really have an idea. But in high school, I had a teacher who, I was in choir in our high school's a cappella choir. And she made me the MC for all of our school's choir concerts. And for every time we had a concert, I'd come on stage and I'd introduce the singers. I had a partner too, Alexa, and we would just introduce the choirs that were about to perform. Excuse me. And in the course of doing that, I would have a lot of fun with it. I'd come up with jokes, and I'd really get kind of crazy introducing the choirs on stage, and really found my on-stage voice. And after the concerts, people would come up to me and be like, "Hey, you've got a great voice for broadcasting. Has anyone ever told you that? Has anyone ever told you should maybe go into broadcasting?" And at first, no one had really told me that before. But by the end of that year, I had heard it hundreds of times from people after the show, like, "You should really go into broadcasting." And so by that point, I was like, maybe I should go into broadcasting. And so when I was applying for colleges, I was looking at a bunch of the ones that I thought about going to. And BYU was one of the ones on my list. And I knew that I wanted to do broadcasting, and saw that BYU's broadcasting program had just won some award. They were like number 3 in the nation for broadcasting schools. And I was like, well, dang, I'll just go there. And so I did, and got in the program, and then just loved it. Just realized that it was the perfect fit for me, and the more classes I took, the more I liked it. But my whole life, I've been making videos. I've been interviewing people. I've been telling stories with a camera and with my voice, and doing like podcast kind of stuff. I did that my whole life. And so broadcasting really was just the perfect fit.
Okay.
So how does it feel to be interviewed and not the interviewer?
It's weird. I don't like it.
Wait, actually, you don't like it?
On camera or on mic, I always feel so uncomfortable because I'm like, I don't know. I think it's easier for me to ask questions than to answer them.
Right, make somebody else the star, more of like a question and answer kind of thing.
And you guys know this because you do a podcast, but also I hate the sound of my own voice on recording. I'm
that's
used to it by
crazy.
now.
Even you do.
Because I mean, I've heard
That's funny.
Like you get used to it after a while. Because I've heard my voice in news broadcasts and on the radio so many times that I just like know that that's what I sound like. But every time I hear it, I'm still like, oh yeah, that's I guess what I sound like.
I think I might be like the only person on planet Earth that likes the sound of my own voice. Like I love going back and listening to the podcast, and I'm like, yeah, I'm glad I sound like that. I don't think it's like the most amazing voice. Like I'm not like Vin Diesel level, but like, you know, maybe a couple steps below there, I think. I like to pretend.
Dude, that actually is amazing to me that even someone as experienced and with a beautiful buttery voice like yours is still self-conscious about it. Like
absolutely.
all the time I listen back and I'm like, man, I just sound like an uneducated Utah accent white boy like
Mountains.
So that's
22.
funny. I that is comforting to me.
Yeah.
But situations like these where you are the interviewee, probably is a good experience for you to maybe see, I don't know, be in the shoes of the interviewee and
Absolutely, yeah.
Skills.
It helps. It just helps you understand how both sides of a conversation should work, you know, so that when you're putting together your own interviews, you can kind of have a feel for how you want the narrative structure to flow.
Right. And with what we're trying to go with Mike at the Helm, like I feel like you see a lot of these, especially celebrity podcast interviews. It's usually like, oh, well, I'm going to ask you this question, and then how do you feel about this, and then where are we going to go from here? And I just feel like I am less of a fan of a question and answer and more of a fan of just a real genuine conversation, instead of making one person the star. Like, how about we're all the stars? How about we're all like, you know, a part of the story? And like that's why I really appreciate the Joe Rogan podcast. But I know that's a big complaint where they're like, oh, like I've heard all of Joe Rogan's opinions. I know what he's going to say before he even says it. Like, what do you think about those like conversational style podcasts versus like straight interview?
I think, sorry. I think question and answer type interviews definitely have their place, right? Because it's to get information from someone. If you're interviewing a star about their experience on a new movie they just did, you don't really, I mean, your opinion doesn't matter that much. You know, you're just trying to hear what they have to say. But definitely for, I guess it depends on like the vibe of your podcast, you know? Like if you have a news podcast, like one of my favorites is The Daily from the New York Times. I think they do a really good job. But mostly that's Michael Barbaro asking guests questions about news subjects, and then they'll explain it in a way that makes sense and is clear, which is good because they have expertise and he doesn't as the guest. He's just kind of guiding them into the video or into the podcast. But conversation type podcasts, I think, especially if you have a really charismatic host, are really interesting to listen to as well because you get the interaction between the two. One of my favorite podcasts is it's called My Brother, and Me, and it's these three brothers who just answer questions from Yahoo Answers. But it's really funny because they have a great relationship with each other, and their interaction is what makes the show so funny. They're also like all really good at like improv comedy, and so they yes and what people will say in the podcast. Because interviews, like conversation interviews, is a kind of improv, right? And if you have a host who cuts off the conversation rather than kind of building it or gently guiding it to a new direction, it can feel really awkward and forced. You know, like if you're saying, so, like, what do you think about the 2016 election or whatever? And they're like, oh, I think this. And you're like, okay, cool. What do you think about the Super Bowl? You know, then it's like, whoa, where did that come from? But if you can find a way to just build, it'll feel like a much more natural conversation.
And so going forward with go ahead, Mike.
Something with a lot of these podcasts is they'll do things like oh, I want to talk about the story, but maybe I won't talk about it today. Like we don't have enough time. And I've always been like, no, like let's talk about it now. The conversation's fresh now. Like I'm all about, you know, keeping it as natural as possible, like keeping it fresh, keeping it like if you want to tell the story, tell the story. Like don't worry about the time. Like, you know, there's podcasts that are 2.5 hours. There's podcasts that are 40 minutes, and I love everything in between.
And you can always edit too if it comes out awkward.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
And going forward, Joseph, I mean, I haven't talked to you, had a long conversation with you for like a year or so. And so going forward, are you looking to, host something? Are you wanting to get into being like a journalist for a news network? What would be kind of like your vision for the future?
So, what I'd love to do, I have a lot of dreams about things that I'd love to do. I'd love to host a show like a news podcast or something. I'd love to be a news anchor. I think that'd be really fun. I'd also love to be a foreign correspondent at some point, so live overseas and kind of report on an area of the world. I'd love to do something out of like East Asia. My minor is Asian Studies, and or somewhere in I think like Scandinavia would be cool too. I don't know why, just because I think it's a cool place. In the meantime, though, I'm looking at jobs at news stations around the country. In at least the TV news field, which is my field, broadcast news, you usually start off at a smaller station, and then you'll work there for a couple of years. Every 2 or 3 years, you'll kind of switch to a new location. That's just the way the industry works, unless you find a place you really like and keep working there. But you just go and build experience and build your resume, build your reel, and try and work your way up. The bigger markets, news market is like a way of ranking them by size, by how many TVs there are to watch a show. And so number 1 in the country is New York City. Salt Lake City is number 33, which is actually kind of surprising. It's much bigger than you would expect. It's because that all of Utah is one news market, from like Logan down to St. George. It's all the same TV stations, and so it's a really big market as well. It's so most, like a BYU graduate could expect to maybe start off at like somewhere between maybe 175, kind of that range for a news market. And the higher up you go, obviously the higher the pay is, and the more eyes you have on your career. But
so
cool.
You said you were looking into East Asia, like news and stuff like that. Were you always interested in Asia, or do you think your mission in Taiwan has like really like helped you like go for something like that?
I think it was
like got you more interested. I mean,
definitely my mission, because before I'd never really thought about Asia. It sounds bad, but like it wasn't a place that I was like interested in or really gave much thought to, other than like I knew that I liked Thai food. I knew that I liked pho, but like that's it's like the extent of my knowledge. When I was like all throughout elementary school, middle school, and high school, I took Spanish. Actually, I've taken like 5 or 6 years of Spanish. Still can't really speak it that well, but I thought that when I got my mission call, I was going to go speak Spanish, but then that was not the case. And so on my mission in Taiwan, I realized that I just love the culture. I love the people there. I love everything about it. And it's just such a place with so much interesting history and political interaction between all the countries there, and really deep, long-standing traditions and religion. And I just love it. I think it's so fascinating.
I am personally like not Mormon, but I would like, I wish I could do something similar to that, where I could just go to a country for 2 years, not have to worry about anything else, and just kind of understand the culture. Like, I know that's not the only thing you do as a missionary, but that's an experience you get to have. And I know a lot of people that are like that, you know, may have like left the church, but they still really enjoyed their mission because it was still all about you know, like just getting to know a culture and understanding a whole new language.
And you know, I think a lot of missionaries come home and I think overestimate their understanding of a culture. You know, like they'll come back from Taiwan and be like, I'm an expert in Asian culture now, and like really you're not. You know, you're there's so many gaps in your knowledge and things you just can't understand well while being a missionary, right? Like even pop culture, that's like you're totally not going to interact with that at all. But something that you do is you spend like the whole day talking with people, right? And so even if maybe you don't get a very good understanding of the culture, I think you can get a good understanding of what people there are like, you know, what they think about, what they're worried about, just the way that they talk. And I think that's really valuable too, understanding what the people there are like.
Yeah, I knew somebody who like went on their mission to Brazil, and he was like, yeah, like when he came back, he's like, yeah, I'm basically like Brazilian now, and like he said it like kind of like he was being serious. And yeah, I mean, there are tons of people that will like think that, you know, now they know everything about the culture,
Yeah.
or they're basically that ethnicity. It's like
I'm like an honorary Taiwanese person, basically. You know, some people have said that I'm like, you know,
Exactly.
Taiwanese, and yeah, I don't think that's accurate.
No, all
Right.
the time people they'll ask me questions about maybe Taiwanese or Chinese culture, and that's another thing. People think Taiwanese and Chinese culture are like the same thing when they're very different. But it makes me realize how little I know about those cultures.
Yeah, definitely. And when you I have a lot of relationships with people there who, like, to this day, friendships with people who, like, I didn't really know on my mission. And just in talking with them and developing like a friendship with them outside of missionary stuff, you really learn a lot of things that you don't know. Like, they'll say, I don't know, like a slang word, and you'll be like, what? And it's like a totally opening your eyes to this part of the culture you had no idea existed.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I guess
It's a
English
beautiful
is supposed to
thing.
be like I guess English is supposed to be the hardest like language to learn, because there's so much of that, like slang and all those different kinds of words that people use, and just the way sentences are put together and how similar words can be.
One of the biggest difficulties that I've noticed, so my girlfriend is actually from Taiwan. We met at a wedding like a couple of years after I'd gone back from my mission. But there's like one of the biggest, what's the word? Like,
Language barriers?
one of the biggest barriers in our relationship is that inside jokes are so much more prevalent than you'd think. And so, like, in a conversation with my family or with her family, they'll be talking like, you know, even if, I mean, she has really great English and understands all the words we're saying, but if someone makes a reference to like a psych episode, you know, then it's like, they'll have
Right.
no idea, she'll have no idea what we're saying, and she'll like totally not get the reference. And the same thing happens when you're talking with people from another culture too. They have their own movies, their own memes, their own music, and they'll reference that all the time because that's what you do. And like, as a foreigner, you're totally left out of that unless you know, have somehow interacted with that piece of culture before.
Or if you've really been immersed for like a very significant amount of time.
Yeah.
Like there's people you'd meet that were, you know, American born and lived in Taiwan for like 20 years. And, you know, if they would probably have the cultural knowledge of Taiwan the same
Yeah.
that I have the cultural knowledge of America.
Yeah.
Definitely.
For sure. Sometimes it's hard for, especially like there are a lot of people that will move out here or move anywhere in their 30s and 40s, and they'll have a much harder time like understanding the lingo or the right way to say words or things like that. Like I have a coworker who was in the Soviet Union, and he left like right after it collapsed, and he came to America, and he was like 35 when he came back out here, and he still has like such a thick Russian accent, and he'll not understand references and things like that. And that's just so interesting to see, like when you're so used to a specific culture for 35 years. I mean, how are you expected to go and just adapt to a whole new culture?
Yeah.
Dang. Yeah, and that's something you see with like you know, there was like the Syrian refugee crisis, and when was that really big? Like 2016, when that was like really blowing up.
Mm-hmm. It was like
but they would go to all these different
2011 to
countries.
2016.
Yeah. But there's these different situations where refugees go to different countries, and they just never adjust, and then they're never welcomed because they're just seen as foreigners. And I can't imagine being in that situation where you're forced to go to somewhere so foreign. And
Right, because
don't
it's
have
different.
a choice to go back home.
When you like want to learn about a country's culture than when you're forced to, right?
Yeah.
Like I want to understand Taiwanese culture better, and so I would, you know, I seek out Taiwanese podcasts and media to try and understand it better. But if you were put in a situation where you just kind of had to be there, that would be much harder to kind of what's the word? I guess assimilate. That doesn't sound great, but assimilate
Yeah.
into the culture.
Yeah, it's
I heard
definitely a
TV is
challenge.
great for that.
What's up?
I hear TV is great for that. Like I don't know. I've talked to a lot of people where they're like, I learned like this off of just watching the TV. Like, I'm sure it's not like that's the only outlet they're getting it from, but I guess like there's things like those references and things in TV where you wouldn't get that in like a normal everyday conversation.
Yeah, I don't
think-
know about you, Joseph, but when I was in Taiwan, the people that I met that had the best English, more often than not, they learned it from Friends, the TV
Yeah.
show Friends.
Friends?
Yeah, I met a lot
Yeah.
of people who did that. I think
funny.
it's important just to, if you want to learn about another culture, to never have the mindset that you like understand enough. You know, you always have to just acknowledge that you really don't know that much. Which is why I think it's dangerous to come home from your mission and be like, oh yeah, I'm an expert on this culture and this language, because
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
you're really not. There's so many things that you don't know, and if you just always keep that mindset, you'll never seal yourself off from learning more.
All right.
Well, it's also kind of like, I feel like it's a big American culture thing where like, you know, we're so used to our culture being maybe the spotlight of the world, and so that we think other cultures are smaller than they actually are. Just because we're raised, we've grown up, we've become accustomed to that soft power
Yeah,
in the world. Yeah.
that's interesting.
But moving back to the journalism stuff, so you and I have had conversations previously about like misinformation on Facebook specifically, and
Oh,
a lot
boy.
of that misinformation going around stems from mistrust of the media, and the media just being seen as maybe a propaganda arm of the ultra wealthy, or one political party or the other, or whatever source it might be. And I know you've expressed frustration about that to me previously. And so what trends are you seeing in that, and like why, like how do we combat it? Like I don't know, what do you think of that type of situation that is unfolding?
It's the first thing I want to say is that all the criticisms of the media are valid and most of them are right. You know, like when people say that media is a propaganda tool, yes, it is. When people say that media can be biased with a political agenda, yes, it can be. When people say that it's like, you know, a tool of spreading American imperialism around the world, sure, yeah, probably. But the thing is, like, it can be that, but can also be good too. It's a complicated thing, you know. It doesn't have to be just all one thing, and that's why being an educated media consumer is so important. Because, like, there are definitely, I'm sure, media executives who are trying to push their agenda through a certain framing, or like they'll edit stories, or like, you know, not let certain things be published to try and, like, you know, further what they want to say. But most reporters that I know, even people who work at big media organizations, are really just hardworking people who care about the truth, who care about reporting honest facts, and who do lots of really, really difficult work to get there. And that's what makes it difficult, right? Is I think another big difficulty with journalism is that it's as much as it is a public service, it needs to be profitable so that people will do it, right? The wages in journalism are already really, really low, unless you work at like a really big news station. I mean, it has to turn a profit, right? That's why you have subscription fees, and that's why you have ads.
Yeah.
But because of that, it can make it inaccessible, or it can make people feel like... I think one of the best examples of this is TV news, right? Like, TV news is maybe one of the best ways of getting information out to a lot of people at once.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, everyone has a TV, and so many people tune into TV broadcasts that it's like, if you run something in a primetime spot, like millions of people across the country will immediately see it and know it. It's amazing, an amazing tool.
Yeah.
But also, the way that TV makes money, since you don't really pay a subscription fee, is through ads. And so you have to keep people watching your whole show so that you can put ads in there so that people will watch the ads so that you can get paid. But to make people keep watching your show, you have to do things that a lot of people hate with journalism, like, like, does swimming pool chlorine cause cancer? More after the break. And then after the break, it's like, it doesn't.
Right.
People.
It's always like the safe option, yeah.
But like that's what keeps you watching over the across the breaks. There's a saying in journalism that if it bleeds, it leads. Which is like, if you have a really bad accident or like a crime, that's your number one spot on the show. And like, to me, that's morally reprehensible. I hate that. I hate the fact that that's the thing, because I'm like, it feels voyeuristic. That doesn't feel like real news. No one needs to know that. No one needs to see that. But yet, if you have to do some of those stories as a journalist so you can do real stories like political corruption or homelessness or businesses exploiting their workers or environmental damage or police brutality. Like that's why news exists. In my opinion, that's the most important thing. It's a check on government and I would say corporate power as well. Putting people or holding people in power to account and making them, not letting them get away with the bad things they try and do. And so if you can, with that, and also telling good stories too, I think that's the other value of media. I think there's lots of good things that happen in the world too that need to be shared and highlighted and told in a good way.
Get less clicks.
Huh?
They get less clicks though.
They do.
That's the thing, is like the bad stuff is always the stuff that gets the people's attention.
Exactly. And if you're a local newspaper or a local news station that's already struggling financially, what are you gonna? You have to do clickbait. You have to do ads. You have to do something to keep your profits afloat. I want to talk about two things. First, I want to talk about the great shift that journalism is undergoing, and then I want to talk about misinformation and media distrust. Okay. I always like to ask people this question, but do you know anybody who watches news on TV?
Yes, I do, but they're all like in the 50 to 60 range.
What about you, Arza?
Yeah, I think my grandma, but that's probably it, yeah.
So how do both of you consume your news? Where do you get your news from?
I get a lot of my news from Reddit and YouTube. I don't know. I'm a big fan of, I don't know if you've seen the Philip DeFranco show. I think he's really good at like presenting people with the news without it being like super clickbaity or like leaning any certain way. But I try to get my news from all sorts of media outlets, especially when I'm trying to like look at studies and potentially talk about them on the podcast and whatnot.
I read a lot of New York Times and BBC, and then I get stuff from Reddit as well. But
when you look at news stories, will you like go to like NewYorkTimes.com? Let's see what's on the top today, or do you like just get it through social media?
The first thing I do every day is check the news. Like I'll look at Reddit and then I'll look at, whatever else is like putting out there. I usually, but definitely like I will stumble across news on social media, but I do go out of my way, I think, to look at what's going on in the world.
Yeah, I think I usually see what's going on Reddit, and then usually I go to, because a lot of times the news networks on Reddit are, I don't know, places like The Guardian, where it's like I personally am not a fan of The Guardian. I feel like they're pretty biased in their reporting. So then usually I try and find the same topic from a more neutral outlet, like what I consider New York Times or BBC to be.
Personally, I think I should probably start using Reddit because most people I know use it, and it seems like a really good tool. But what I do is I use Twitter, and then I follow like, I don't know, probably like 50 or 60 hundreds of different reporters and journalists and then news stations. And so my feed is just news all the time. And so every time there's a new story, every outlet will cover it, and then journalists will tweet about it, and then so I'll kind of see it all that way, and then that's how I find out about like new things that are happening. But then if I want to read deeper, I'll usually go to websites, and I have 4 or 5 that I'm subscribed to, and then others that are free that I read, and see, that's the thing. Pretty much everyone I know from my generation. Hold on, just one sec.
Here's a fun tip for you listeners out there. If you don't have a New York Times subscription and you would like to look at an article, go into your private browser and you won't get any pop-ups.
Oh, that is fantastic.
Okay, so, yeah, pretty much everybody I know gets their news from social media or the internet or Reddit or YouTube or something like that. And that's just the way that our generation does it. I'm guessing TV news, as we know it today, is not going to be around in 20 years. I think maybe...
Unless they change it.
Unless they change it, but, like, it's just... I mean, no one... I don't have a TV... I mean, we have a television, like a flat screen, but we don't have like a Comcast subscription, or we don't have cable, at my house. We have a Roku, so we watch all their stuff on Netflix or Hulu or whatever.
And I'm surprised most like Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, like they don't have anything that has to do with the news. And
they
I
don't,
feel like
which
that
is
would
interesting.
Get views.
Hulu does. Hulu has quite a few news networks partnered
they
with
do?
them. I know like Fox is, and I think like MSNBC or CNBC, or I don't know, some of them. But they have quite a few, and they like release their broadcasts on these streaming services.
I know the Young Turks is pretty popular on social media, like with the left. I feel like if they were, or I don't know. Do you guys remember Channel One News? Was anybody else forced to watch that in middle school?
Yeah, no, I remember.
I wish that kind of stuff was still around, especially for adults. Like it was cool to watch a 10-minute video, and I feel like those would be popular on like those sites like Netflix and Hulu.
So essentially, Channel One News. It was in middle school. Like right after lunch or right before lunch, we would watch like a little news broadcast that was especially for youth. And so it was like 10 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes. And it would just go over like the current events of like the day or the week or whatever. And I really enjoyed it, honestly.
Interesting.
A lot of people didn't because you had to like take notes. But yeah.
That's cool, yeah. I like that. So news is undergoing this huge shift where... I mean, most newspapers, even like here in Utah, the 2 biggest papers, the Salt Lake Tribune and the Deseret News, just announced that they're going totally digital, except for like a weekly paper on Sunday. They're not doing daily newsprint anymore.
That's crazy.
Which is crazy. I mean, that's been a staple of the community for, I don't know how long, 100 years. And that's happening everywhere, all over the whole country. And that's tough because... when something is digital, it's much easier to get information and make money. Like if you have an article and you put it up on your website and it's free and you just get money off ads, that's not going to make as much money as someone paying for a newspaper subscription, And then it's harder to keep journalism alive. And I think there's a lot of value in news commentators like Philip DeFranco, or I know a lot of other ones on YouTube who have shows where they'll kind of like give a summary of the news, or there are a lot of right-wing ones too, like Ben Shapiro and lots of people who...
Steven Crowder.
Rush
Limbaugh.
But what all of those people use reporting from news organizations, right? And like as a YouTube commentator, if you're able to kind of distill the news to your audience, that's great, because people can just watch you and kind of get a gist for it. But you have to get your information and your reporting from somewhere. Someone on the ground has to, make a phone call to the governor's house and ask him about his new policy for COVID-19. Someone has to be doing that on the ground. And most of that burden falls on local journalists. And then their stories will get picked up or copied or just quoted in national publications. And national reporters do a lot of their own reporting too. I don't want to minimize their work. And then YouTubers will take stuff from national and local news and put that in their shows. And the local journalists, the poor little local journalists, don't get paid. They do all this work and reporting, and it just filters up. But like, what are you gonna do? You can't. monopolized information. But so I don't know what's going to happen to news. It's kind of it's an exciting but also scary field to be in because it's changing so much so fast. Yeah, it's different every single day. So I wonder what it's going to be like. I mean, looking at paths forward, I can think of. I mean, if more places start charging a subscription fee, I guess that's okay. But also, like, it's hard. I mean, especially unless if you're someone like me, you know, who needs to read a lot of news for their job, for their work. I can't really afford to be subscribed to like 15 different news publications, you know, like that's too expensive.
Right.
One of them is, you know, $5 a month. And that's a huge part of my budget. So I don't know. What do you guys think? If you had to guess as consumers of news, where do you think it's going to go?
So I see, I don't know, this, we talked a little bit about this distrust of media. I know that's going to be coming up a little later too, and I know you said you wanted to say some things on that topic, but it seems like a lot of people distrust the media because, you know, they, like I said, they think it's this propaganda arm, and I personally believe that a lot of it is propagandized. Is that the right word? But it's used as propaganda for maintaining the status quo, because, you know, these news networks, a lot of them are owned by billionaires, and they will report like honest news as long as it supports the status quo, because the status quo is what, you know, maintains their money. And you can see this with like the way GameStop was just reported, or like during the Black Lives Matter protests, how you know, there would be like people on the ground, like local journalists and stuff, and a lot of times the protests were a lot more peaceful than national news outlets reported, or private journalists, I should say. And it seems like a lot of the issues that people see with maybe like a government-backed media source, we see already by a private media source, by them trying to maintain their profits and maintain the status quo. And so I see things going more towards like a subsidized, like government-funded type way. Because you look at like the BBC, and the BBC is, you know, world-renowned for being a pretty good news outlet. And so that's kind of what I think. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but
I think that could make sense. The only problem I have is, you know, like I said before, I think one of journalism's most important duties is to be a check on government power. And, you know, I don't think it can be in any way responsible or like, they shouldn't have to report to anyone higher up than themselves, except for, I guess, their audience. Because, you know, you have to... There shouldn't be anything that's off limits for you to publish, you know? I don't know if that makes sense. What I'm trying to say is, like, if...
For sure.
If, like, I don't know, Washington Post is owned by Amazon, right? And so if Jeff Bezos did something awful, they should be able to publish something bad about him without risking getting shut down or getting censored, you know? I think that's important.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I think you're right. The BBC is a government arm, but it does a really good job being neutral.
And, well, before when you said that one of the roles of media is to be a check on government, you also said on corporations. And we've seen a big decline in our media being a check on corporations here in the United States. And that's because it is owned by corporations.
Yeah. Or it is a huge, like, CNN is a huge company.
Yeah.
Amazon is, the biggest company.
Yeah. And in our last episode, we talked about, like, GameStop and what was going on with that. Did you pay attention to that much?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you did, because you put a bunch of stuff on your Instagram about it. But I know a lot of news networks, they were, like, purposefully reporting like false information about it, like these hedge fund backed corporations.
And they'd bring like a hedge fund guy on the show to be like, "This is a bad idea. You should stop doing this."
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
When I mean that's like totally. That's like definitely that's another perspective, sure, but like that's totally missing the zeitgeist, right? Like no one cares. The whole point of the GameStop thing was that people don't care about the hedge fund guys or what they have to say. That's why they did the short squeeze.
Well, I think I remember seeing a lot of these news outlets were saying that like all the puts were being bought out again, and they weren't yet. I don't know. Do you remember seeing anything like that, Arza?
Yeah. So there were ads being run on these news networks about like how these hedge funds had already closed all their positions, and so there was no use in like holding anymore because it wasn't like sticking it to the man anymore. But it was all just like just false information.
I don't even think they've still bought it.
And that being
I think
said,
they're just paying fines up the wazoo.
Yeah, and that being said, I don't like think media is like. I think a large amount of media is like honest and good work and everything. Like, I just do see some situations where, like you said earlier, like these criticisms are valid, and there are situations where, I don't know, maybe corporations aren't reported on the way that they should be. And I guess I don't really see a difference in like not reporting properly on corporations and not reporting properly on government. Like in an ideal world, both of those would be reported completely honestly and transparently, but I don't see a situation in which that happens.
Yeah,
I guess.
I think that's true. Media does a really good job checking the government, but not so great at checking corporations sometimes. But I think one of the reasons why is because it's not as profitable, right? Especially if the corporation is funding your organization. Yeah. I think the best way to fix the problem with news is a subscription system, which, but also that has a lot of problems too. But like if your newspaper is 100% funded by people paying to read your news, you're only liable to one person or, millions of people, your readers, right? That's the only people who matter when it comes to reporting is them. There's no one invested in you reporting things in a certain way because there's no financial incentive. As journalists, we're taught all the time at the SPJ, the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, says that you always need to disclose if you're reporting on a subject that you might have financial interests in. Like if, let's say you have investment in a company, you shouldn't be reporting on that company. You should find someone else to do it because you have a conflict of interest.
Okay.
And you're not supposed to ever accept gifts from anybody either. If you cover a story, you're not supposed to accept anything they give you because you don't want to come across as maybe having been bribed to report things a certain way. And I think a lot of reporters do a good job following that, but the companies they work for don't always. But then again, if you had a newspaper that was completely funded by the people, are people going to pay the money? Subscriptions are expensive, and how many can you subscribe to before you have to just stop? And so, I don't know.
Have you heard of a? It's a subscription service. It's a new news service called The New Paper. Have you heard of that?
I might have.
So, my roommate uses it, and he's been loving it so far. And essentially, it is a subscription-based service, and there's no ads, so there's not supposed to be, these conflicts of interest. And these reporters, they kind of what you were saying, they look at all this news, and they kind of curate it for the subscriber, and they put out like a weekly update on everything that's going on, and they just like simplify it down, make it digestible, like a TLDR, too long didn't read type of deal. And I don't know, so is that the type of thing you're talking about? Like maybe something like that could help save I don't know, honest journalism or
Definitely. I think that's a really good
restore trust
idea.
in journalism.
Something like that, or something like, I don't know, maybe you could have like an alliance of newspapers kind of band together and have like a one-stop access fee for all of them. Like maybe it's a little more expensive, like maybe it's $20 a month, but it gets you access to like this whole package, kind of like cable TV sort of, where you can you have access to all these different newspapers. Maybe that would work. Like the new paper, I really like that idea, but at the end of it, someone has to be writing the stories that they're curating. Someone has to be reporting on those on the ground, doing the work.
Yeah, that's true.
And also, I mean, that's a lot of journalists are in journalism because they love it, not for the money, right? Because you don't, I mean, no one gets paid that much unless you're like an anchor for CNN. And so, I mean, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to continue to be enthusiastic because journalism is, sometimes it's fun, like I got to do this story where I toured this movie set. It was like this movie set that looked like Jerusalem in Utah. It was awesome. I got to tour it, take a lot of pictures, super fun day. But then other times you're just on the phone for hours, or you're out in the cold, or you're, getting yelled at, or getting facts hidden from you, getting lied to by police and by politicians, and it's tough.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I can't imagine. Like, that'd be really hard as a journalist, is like, if you interview a politician and they lie to you, and then you publish that, and then you could catch the flack for maybe being like a sellout or being biased when you were just reporting on what you were told.
Yeah.
Are there like safeguards for that at all for journalists, or?
I mean, not really. If you get tricked, you get tricked. The best thing is just to try and get a second opinion. One of the things that one of my favorite quotes from journalism school is, "If your mother says she loves you, check it out." In other words, like, don't believe anything. Try and get a source or a fact to back up every claim you make in your writing or in your paper, or that someone tells you, because you never know. You never know when you're being deceived. Another hard part about working in journalism is, this will tie into the next topic too, is just people not believing you, or people not trusting you, or being told you're fake news, like you'll be like out filming a protest or something, and someone's like, "You're fake news," and you're like, I'm just holding the camera. I'm filming you guys. Like, one of my favorite, I won't name names, but there was this event down at BYU where someone had been like hosting these big parties.
Yeah.
And the news interviewed this person and was like, "Why are you doing this?" And the person said in their interview, like, "Well, like, it's no big deal, and like, if people die, they're gonna die," and which is like a really terrible quote. And the newspaper put that in their story, right? Or I think it was like maybe a TV station. And later, the person on social media was like, "They took me out of context. That's not what I said." And then he's like, "I had one of my friends record the whole interview, and then they put it up, and the whole interview was like worse than the one quote that they put up." And it was like, they're not fake news.
Wow.
They're just putting your words verbatim in the article. Like, that's literally what you said. And so I don't know. It's hard.
And then they just don't like how it came across once it like hits a large group of people.
Yeah. And mistrust of media is at an all-time high. And there are several reasons for that. And I think valid critiques is one of them. Like the financial model, 24-hour news cycle, being a propaganda is another one. But I feel like most of the people who don't like the mainstream media are, to generalize, Republicans or Trump supporters, Trump's base. And I think a huge drive in not trusting the media was came from Trump's campaign. Because, I mean, since he was elected, even before he was elected, he had this constant narrative he was pushing that the news was fake, that you couldn't trust the reporting on him, that they just wanted him out of office. And that's really hard to come back from, right? I mean, because you've had this guy for 4 years just, pushing endlessly that the news is fake, that they're coming to get him, that you can't trust anything they say. And so what about when news reports on something like, I don't know, an earthquake, or even something entirely non-political? People are still poisoned against the news, right? They're not going to believe it. They're not going to trust what they're reading, which is, I think, kind of dangerous. Because if you can only believe news that a president says is believable, then he can make you believe anything he wants.
Yeah, one person controls the narrative. Mm-hmm. If that's the case.
Yeah.
Along with that, like, how do you, like, so I had this coworker and we were discussing politics, and I mentioned like some news article that I read, and I can't remember the exact situation, but he asked, okay, so how do you know that's real? And I was like, well, you can like fact check it, like things get fact checked on the internet. And he was like, but how do you know that the fact checker isn't biased? Like, how do you know that that's like real, that the fact checker actually knows that it is real? And I was like kind of stumped. I was like, I don't know. Like,
it's a good question. I had a discussion with somebody once near the beginning of coronavirus, or maybe it was like over the summer, and they could not be persuaded that they were of the opinion that the numbers were inflated, that the disease wasn't that deadly, that it was all, kind of a big scam, that masks didn't really work. And I was like, man, like, what? And I sent him this article from CNN, and I was like, look, they have numbers. Like, they know the excess deaths. You can look at the number of people that have died this year, way higher than a normal year. Like, even if COVID is fake or something, there's something that's killing all these people. And he's like, don't get your news from CNN. It's all fake. You can't trust that. And I was like, then what am I supposed to do? Like, you make a point that says that you're right. And then I say, well, no, that's wrong. And here's some facts. And you just say, actually, no, those aren't real facts. There's nothing I can do. If I can only use his news sources to find something that disagrees with him or proves him wrong, it's not going to happen because it doesn't exist. I don't know. I think news consumption requires a certain amount of trust, which is unfortunate, Like, I think it's cool when newspapers are transparent with how they do reporting. Sometimes they will be. Well, they'll kind of explain their process and, like, here's who we talked to, here's what we did, here's how we got our facts. And I think that really helps people to kind of trust the paper a little bit more. But I think that's why having these institutional journalism organizations like the New York Times is important, because you can know, well, like, based on their record, they've been a pretty accurate paper for a long time. Okay. And so, I mean, they don't really have an incentive to trick me, really. I mean, like, based on their past performance, I trust that this newspaper is going to tell me something that's true. Yeah. I think a lot of people also get hung up with bias, too. They'll be like, the New York Times, it's a liberal bias. You can't trust that.
Yeah.
But I think there's a big difference between bias and accuracy. Because something can be biased and still be accurate, Like, if the New York Times has a liberal bias and only, tends to cover a lot of topics like Black Lives Matter or climate change is real, or things like that. Like, yeah, that's I guess you could call that a bias. They're reporting on things that that would be considered liberal ideas or liberal causes. But even if it's biased, what they're saying is still accurate. Like the things they're saying are true. And so if you're concerned about bias, just make sure you read different biased papers, but make sure you're reading accurate papers.
Yeah. Mike, do you have any methods for maybe sorting through newspaper or news or anything?
I just try to get my news from as many outlets as possible. You guys were talking about, like, news outlets being backed by like studies and science. And what's scary is like, there's been a lot of accounts of these corporations paying for studies that are like biased, or they can be like one-sided and not like as true as it may seem. Like they'll pay off these scientists, and it's scary when it's and it's been like that since at least the 70s when they've seen actual accounts of it, and it's just scary to see that you can't trust science even as much as you used to be able to anymore. Like, I'm a big believer in masks and coronavirus and all that. Like, I don't know. I feel like when I tell people that, they're like, oh, you're crazy. Like, all science is real. But if you look at the stuff, you can see a lot of false information on science and how, a lot of these studies will change over the years when it's looked at more and it's tested more.
Well, that's one of the foundations of science is, like, it's always evolving, right? And, like, there definitely are biased, like, research studies and stuff. And that's one of the values of, like, learning how to evaluate methodology. Like, and I'm not even, like, that great at it. But, there's most studies will include their methodology of, like, how they go about doing their study. And you can look at that and you can, kind of pick out, like, oh, is there a low sample size? If there's a low sample size, then, like, they could have done, like, participant, like, what's it called? Like, basically, like, biased choosing of, like, who to
Selection
include in
bias.
your study. Or, yeah.
Right. So my girlfriend's mom is anti-vax, and when we were dating in high school, she sat me down one time to watch a anti-vax documentary. And so, I have an open mind, not really as much about vaccines, but I was watching it, and they were coming out with all these quote like scientific studies. And, they were saying these things like, oh, like we decided to not vaccinate like these kids and they just seem so much brighter and better. And like, I don't know, I feel like the way they were going for, like, they didn't have any even, like any numbers on like what's even going on. They're just saying like, oh, it's better. It's they're more smart or whatever. But they'll also, I've even looked at a lot of these studies, and yeah, it'll be like, these were 26 kids that they tested it on. It's like 26 kids? Like, that's not an amount of kids. Test like 50,000. Don't test 26 and like put them all in the same room.
And another problem with media is that sensational studies get picked up really fast. If someone comes out with a study that says like, studies show that using a cell phone causes insanity, and you're like, whoa, huh? And then you publish that, and then you publish the article that says like, a group of scientists at the University of Melbourne found that cell phones can cause insanity, and it's like, whoa, that's crazy. But then you look at the study, and it's like, okay, they did one test on like 4 monkeys and gave them all cell phones, and one of them had a crazy reaction. It's like, that's not a study. I mean, it is a study, but it's not a good study. But it's
exactly,
if you don't really know what you're looking for, and if you're behind on a deadline and you're already overworked and you're not getting paid that much, and you have to put something up so that you can get paid, you're going to grab for an article like that.
Do you guys know what aspartame is, like Splenda, or like what's in Diet Coke and stuff like that? So there's been all this, I don't know. I'm sure you guys have heard like, oh, aspartame's bad for you. Like, you can't have it with Diet Coke. Like, Diet Coke is way worse for you than regular Coke. And that study was actually done on like rats, like aspartame being bad for you.
Yeah.
And it turns out when they studied it again, just in humans specifically, like it would take way more aspartame to damage a human than it would a mouse or a rat.
I have a story.
So it's actually...
in college, I worked for BYU Radio. I worked for a news radio show, a daily live radio show called Top of Mind with Julie Rose. It's a really great show. And as a producer, my job was to find story ideas and then kind of pitch them to our producers, and then they would say, oh, that's a great idea, let's go for it. And then I would contact the guest, write all the questions, and kind of have like a show layout, give that to the host, and then the host would call the guest. They'd have like a 15-minute conversation, and then that's it. So I'm basically all the behind-the-scenes prep. And so one time I found this study that was... have you guys heard of Chinese restaurant syndrome? It's basically this like racist idea that came about in like the 1950s that because they put MSG in Chinese food, like you'd go and then you'd have all these weird reactions like rashes or like fatigue, and like all these weird things would happen because you're eating this Chinese food. And so then people are super resistant to like eating MSG because it's like, oh, MSG, the Chinese people use it in their cooking. And they use it all the time.
Right. And it's still a thing today.
It is. I had companions on my mission. Well, I don't know about companions, but I knew missionaries on my mission who would like, when they'd eat at restaurants, they'd be like, hey, could you not put any MSG on that?
Yeah.
They'd specifically request not to put it on. And I think that all stems back to this idea of Chinese restaurant syndrome, that it's bad for you somehow. But I found this one article, so I thought it'd be interesting to talk about that on the show, how like it was all kind of fake and not really a real thing. And in the process of researching, I was like, I gotta find an expert, someone who could talk about this. And I found someone who had done a study showing that MSG is actually like healthier for you than sodium. So like if you're not eating MSG, then you shouldn't be eating sodium. And I was like, interesting. Like that's kind of cool. He'd be a good person to talk to. And so I had him, like, I was about to book him to come on the show. But then I found something in his research. Like I was looking at the study, and on the side there was this little footnote that said that, like, this research was funded in part by this company. And I was like, what was that? And I Googled it, and it was an MSG company.
Oh, my goodness.
Exactly.
And so I emailed the guy.
Can't trust science.
And I was like, hey, just curious, I noticed your research was funded by this MSG company. Like, would you be able to tell me, like, how much of an impact did they have in your reporting? Like, or in your research? Like, did this impact at all the results? Or, like, you know, we just want to try and be as unbiased as possible on a show. And he never responded. And so we didn't book him to come on the show.
Oh, dang.
Wow.
So
That's nuts.
He almost got away with it, too.
Almost got away with it. And I was like,
Well, it wasn't
I
for
mean,
those
you
meddling kids
kid.
and their dog.
it's like kind of sneaky,
yeah.
but that happens all the time, you know?
Right.
And I'm lucky that I caught it because I very well maybe would, if I hadn't noticed, we would have booked him to come on. He would have just talked about how great MSG is for you and how it's healthier for you than sodium and how you should go out and buy some MSG right now, replace your salt with it, and would have been none the wiser.
So speaking
I'm curious,
of,
do you know much about MSG and salt? Like how they are compared to each other?
I actually don't know.
Like have you done outside research on that?
After
mean,
that, I kind of...
Yeah, I don't know.
I'll have to look that up after. That sounds really interesting.
Not to...
Because I don't
use
know anything about that.
A pun, but I had a bad taste in my mouth. That's why I kind of just dropped it and didn't look into it anymore after that.
I know that Chinese restaurants. Sorry, I had to remember where that train of thought was going. There is a documentary called "The Search for General Tsao."
Yeah,
Have you seen that?
I haven't, but I know what you're talking about.
So, for anyone listening, it's a wonderful documentary, and it's all about how Chinese immigrants, when they were discriminated against when they were first coming over, you know, in the days of the railroad and whatnot, they found their place of belonging and started to, preserve their culture, but also adapt to American culture through restaurants. And they would Americanize their traditional dishes so that they were more appealing to Americans. And that's kind of how they started to first become accepted as, I guess, like equal citizens in American eyes, was through their food. And
Interesting.
I thought that was really cool. Especially just how cool like food is to people connecting and growing relationships and trust. And
That is
stuff
really
like
cool.
Yeah.
Something that I've recently discovered, which was horrifying, especially as someone who wants to cover international politics someday. A lot of information that we get on international politics comes from think tanks. Like, a random example, the Brookings Institution. And I don't want to say anything else about them because I don't know anything about them. But several think tanks, right? Like, you'll read an article from them that says, like, our analysts say that Iran may have a nuke by the end of 2021 or something. And then, you know, as a journalist, you read that and you're like, well, that's like a reputable institution. You know, they have lots of Middle East experts on there. Like, they probably know what they're thinking. And then you publish that in an article like this, like the Carson Institution says that Iran may have nukes by the end of 2021. But then you look at like who funds these think tanks, and a lot of them are like
Oil.
Raytheon or Boeing or like these defense contractors who make bombs and planes and stuff. And
there's also a lot of like oil-backed ones.
Yeah. ExxonMobil and like who will fund these institutions, and then these institutions will publish things that say like pushing maybe we should go to war with these countries, and like that's wild to me. And I think that's not so much as journalists being evil or like manipulative. It's just that like even journalists, even me, are susceptible to false information. And maybe it's not like the kind of false information like vaccines cause flat earth syndrome or something like that, you know. Like obviously most journalists are not going to read that and be like, oh wow. But like things where, you know, where their motives are hidden, or where they have funding that you don't notice, or where maybe you don't really realize the consequence of reporting things in a certain way. That happens all the time.
And that being said, there are quite a few think tanks that, you know, regardless of their funding, they can be pretty unbiased. I mean, just like media outlets.
Absolutely.
The example that comes to mind is the Koch brothers, who are big oil businessmen. That are they? I forget the name of the think tank, but they fund a think tank, and they had them like do some study on what Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan would cost, and they found that it would actually save like over the course of 10 years, it would save like I can't remember how many, but like a couple $1 trillion in medical spending throughout the U.S. And so that would be like, and they're typically like a really right-leaning organization, but they even found that, you know, this left-leaning ideology would actually benefit our economy.
That's cool.
And so there are some think tanks that are really good at getting past that bias of their funders.
Joseph, how can people like sift through articles and be able to tell like whether or not it was well written or well studied, things like that? Like how can the average everyday person try to get their news the cleanest way possible?
I guess the best thing I can say is, one, it's not easy or convenient to be an informed news consumer. It should be, you know, if every journalist was perfect at their job, then it would be easy because you could just read everything and not worry about, you know, being swayed or opinions or false information. But, you know, to err is human. And so no one can be perfect at their job, even the ones that really want to. So it's not convenient, but just read a lot of sources, like what you were saying, Mike. Read from several different sources, and then evaluate it critically. Just think like, I love the maxim of if your mother says she loves you, check it out. If you read anything online, just go in assuming that maybe it's wrong or maybe it's reported correctly, and weigh it against a couple other sources that are good news sources. And you can tell they're good. There's some websites like mediabiasfactcheck.com where you can go and enter any news source and see it'll rate it on a scale of accuracy to not accurate and then left to right. And so it'll give you like a matrix of it's very left-leaning but very accurate, or it's like left-leaning but very not accurate, or it's like center but not accurate, or center but really accurate. Then if you always read the sources, you know, like if they post that they got this information from a study, see if you can pull up the study and read that. If you want to look into funding, you can do that too if you want to go really crazy. The easier way is just to this is dangerous advice, but if you can just find someone that you trust, then you can just kind of consume their information more passively. And I'm pretty guilty of doing that with like The Daily from the New York Times. Like I know that this is bad, but I listen to them totally uncritically. Like I'll just listen to be like, okay, yes, here's what's happening. News. I love it. And then I don't have to worry about it. That's nice. I would love to live in that world all the time, where I could just listen to whatever I wanted and not think about it critically, which is what a lot of people do. But
it's funny. I think that's the thing I'm probably the worst at. Like, I am really skeptical when I see something online, and I'll usually I'm like, if it's not like the most believable, I'll definitely do more research on it and see what's going on. But I feel like I am much more likely to believe someone if they told me and they're like in front of me, or like I'm on a phone call or anything like that. Like, I feel
everyone
like,
has their pet news source, you know.
yeah.
Everyone has like the one thing that they'll like, you know, they'll evaluate everything they read critically except that one thing where they're like, okay, no, I like them. I just think what they're saying is but yeah, that's my advice. Until Christ comes again and purges sin from the world, I don't think we'll be free from making mistakes in journalism and having non-biased reporting. So until then, just make sure that you're being an informed news reporter, looking at lots of sources, and doing your best to stay on top of the misinformation.
So thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Mike at the Helm. And thank you so much to our guest, Joseph Carson. If you want to show some support, Mike, where can they find us?
I forgot. I was going to ask you.
Wait, what?
What website? Well, he had a website, and I forgot about it. What was the website?
So after reaching out to him, we actually found out where you can support him. You can head over to joecarson.net, or his Instagram handle is @JosephGCarson. He puts out a lot of great content and independent journalism type of stuff. So go check him out, give him some support, give him a follow, whatever you feel is appropriate. Mike, where can they support us?
They can support us on At the Helm podcast with YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, or Mike at the Helm. You can also support us at Anchor FM if you would like to give us any amount of money.
And even if it's not money, you know, if you find someone that you think might like our podcast, go ahead and share. Or if you don't think anyone else you know would like it, go ahead and give us a good rating on Apple Podcasts or a follow on Spotify, whatever you feel is appropriate. But yeah, that's all I got. You got anything, Mike?
Goodbye.
Love you guys.